Okay, folks, thank you very much for joining us this evening on another session of History of Ulster's historical talks. Any of you that were attending the last talk that I gave, which is on Galwally House, rest assured this talk will be considerably shorter. I've used the title, The Queen's Island and Docks Raid. It's probably not an official title, but it's something which to me gets across the ethos of the first air raid. So this was the first German air raid in Belfast, took place on the night of 7th, 8th April, and it mainly targeted the docks area, the heavy industries on Queen's Island, although there was some bombing raids, bombs dropped in residential areas that were close to the docks and Queen's Island. Whilst there was some anti-aircraft defence in Belfast, there was a gun emplacement, gun installation at the East Twin Island, for example. It was inadequate. The general perception was that Belfast was just too far away from the European mainland to be bombed, and so the degree of coverage, the degree of protection was reduced accordingly. Unfortunately for the people of Belfast and Northern Ireland, that perception was false. As a result of this first bombing raid, there were 13 men lost their lives, and this talk will focus on those men. I will be referring to other aspects and drawing in some of the bits and pieces of what happened on the night, but primarily this is going to be about the men who died. 9 of the fatalities are buried in the Greater Belfast area, and the other fatalities are buried in Hillsborough, Cookstown, Carmavy in County Antrim, and Lecumber in County Londonderry. One of the fatalities is recorded with an address in Bangor, and one was from Cookstown, but there's no record of where he was living in Belfast. He must have come up and been boarding, so his name would not appear in any of the Belfast street directories or other sources. It's quite possible that he was boarding at Galwally House, because it is known that some firemen who came up from the rural districts were being housed at Galwally House. Of the remaining 11 fatalities, 2 were living in Duncairn ward, 2 lived in Pottinger ward, and 1 lived in each of the following ward: St Anne's, Court, Clifton, Victoria, St George's, Woodvale and Shankill. So you can see that the men who died came from quite a wide area of Belfast, number of different areas within Belfast, but they all died within a very small area of the docks area. This map from the blitzmaps.co.uk, you can purchase the map. This is their online version where you can filter in and pick out where the bombs landed for the different air raids. I've just filtered out all the ones from 16th and in May. So we're just looking at the bombs that landed on Belfast on the 7th, 8th. Now I've cut it in a wee bit so it's not showing all the bomb landings, but just to give you an idea, the yellow circles represent bombs which were 250 kilogram, and they could cause a total demolition within a 9-meter radius and visible damage in a 15-meter radius. The red circles refer to 50 kilogram bombs, which cause total demolition within a 4-meter radius and visible damage within an 8-meter radius. This information is coming from the key on the Blitz maps, so I can't validate it or verify it. I'm just telling you where I'm getting the information from. As I said, you can buy the maps in printed form, and if you're interested in doing that, if you go to that website address that I've got at the bottom of the page, you'll be able to order the map. It's overlaid on a modern map of Belfast, which in some respects is useful, although I would have preferred to have seen it overlaid on the historic map of Belfast as it would have been at the time, because obviously a lot of streets have gone, a lot of areas have been reordered with redevelopment and so forth. But when you look at this map, you can see that there's a cluster of red circles in and around Ballymacarrat. There's also a cluster in and around Grove playing fields in North Belfast. Indeed, these explosions were opposite or nearby to Jellicoe Avenue, which is where houses had been built for veterans of the First World War. So again, you've got these bombs happening in different areas, but Grove playing fields, obviously the amount of damage that would have been done to housing and deaths was minimized. As I said, all the deaths from this raid were in a very concentrated area. In addition to the shipbuilding and engineering works, which we're familiar with, Harrington Wolff, obviously, the Short and Harland aircraft factory and so forth, there were also a lot of timber yards. There were coal yards and chemical works in the docks area. And obviously, when explosions happen, fires start, you're going to get conflagration with those types of materials. And as a result of the air raid, numerous fires were started. One of the fiercest fires was at the premises of McHugh Dick and Company, which was on Duncrew Street. Now, today, when you think of Duncrew Street, you think of it being quite far out from the city centre, but Duncrew Street was right smack in the middle of the docks area. So this is Duncrew Street running along here. And you can see that within this red area, you've got a chemical works up here. You've got timber ponds on either side of this, this island area. This is Northern Road. You've got the Ulster Timber Depot, which was, I think, probably one of the largest timber depots, timber companies in Belfast, certainly. Just off the map, you've got the Midlands, London and Midland Railway Company. I've probably got that name wrong, Gavin, but you'll correct me later. So somewhere along here is where McHugh and Dick had their timber yard. Not precisely sure where, but a number of bombs had landed. As you can see, up here, you've got the same area. So you can see that a number of bombs landed in and around these timber yards. The timber yard at McHugh Dick had caught fire just after midnight, and flames had totally engulfed the yard by the time the firefighters arrived just over 1 hour later. 2 members of the auxiliary fire service lost their lives when a parachute bomb exploded, and they are both commemorated on the Belfast Civil Defence Services Memorial in Belfast City Hall. This is in the Rotunda. It's not generally accessible, but you can arrange to get access to it. Although there are 34 odd names on that, there are some members of the Civil Defence Services who are not recorded there, and I'll be talking about a couple of them later on this evening. It's possible that the men who died were on fire watching duties for commercial concerns and were not on ARP duties. And if that's the case, they may have made a distinction between people who died whilst on civil defence service as opposed to members of the civil defence who died in other circumstances. I don't know, but that's the only reason I can think of for the exclusion of some people from that memorial. The first person I'm going to look at is Archibald MacDonald, or Archie MacDonald. He was born on 3rd September 1918 at the Belfast Corporation Fire Brigade Station at the bottom of Chichester Street, which you can see on this side of the screen. Of course, it doesn't look like that anymore. And this would have been the side, I think, of no, it's not. The Belfast, old Belfast Town Hall would have been just around the corner. So this would have been opposite the law courts. Fantastic picture. Can't remember where I got it from, but it shows the old fire brigade tenders lined up outside the fire brigade headquarters. And in those days, men lived on the premises. So you can see it's a 3-story building. The bottom, the ground floor would have been for the storage of the tenders, but then members of staff would have lived in apartments in the upper floors. So there was always somebody on the premises. And so you got people being born, growing up, living in a fire station, which, let's face it, is every young chap's dream. His father, Archibald's father, was Hugh Gelston MacDonald, who was obviously a fireman, and his mother was Sarah Jane Riddle. Archibald MacDonald was living at Percy Street, boarding at Percy Street, and he was 22 years old when he died, and he's buried in Dundonald Cemetery, and he was buried there on the 10th of April 1941, and that's his headstone in the cemetery. Earlier on today, I gave a small dedication, if you like, at the graveside. The next man is Bryce Espy Harkness, who was born on 9th January 1915 at Lismoney near Moneymore in County Londonderry. And he was born to Thomas Harkness and Mary Espy, who farmed land there. Bryce Harkness was 25 years old when he died, and he's buried in the Fort Hill Cemetery in Cookstown, and he was buried there on the 10th of April. It's not known where he was living in Belfast. So we know he was in Belfast on the night because he died. We don't know when he came to Belfast. We don't know where he lived in Belfast, but as I said, it's quite possible that he was boarding at Galwally House, although there would have been other centres where fire service and other civil defence service workers were being housed. He was a member of Primrose Temperance LOL 1203, Primrose Temperance Royal Arch Purple Chapter 1203, and Royal Black Preceptory 229. He's commemorated on the memorial tablet for Molesworth Street Presbyterian Church in Cookstown. To date, I haven't had an opportunity to visit that church to photograph the memorials, but it is quite unusual to find civilian fatalities commemorated on war memorials. Although there are some other examples, Townsend Street Presbyterian Church, for example, has 5 civilians, not even members of the AFS or civil defence, who are commemorated as war fatalities. And the Second World War tablet for Christchurch in Belfast also records the names of 2 teenage civilians who died during the German air raid. So it's not unknown, but it's not that common. And to my mind, that's something of a shame that a lot of people who died as a result of the war are not commemorated on church memorials. This photograph is from the Belfast Telegraph archive, and I lifted this copy of it from the wartimeni.com website. Thank you very much, Scott. If you want to get a flavour for what happened in Northern Ireland during the Second World War, I can highly recommend going to Scott Edgar's website because it's very well laid out, and it's searchable for names and so forth, and you can pick up a lot of useful information about what was happening during the war, not just during the German air raids, but generally with the Americans and with other training, and with some of the tragedies where servicemen lost their lives due to accidents. For example, there was a boating accident in Dundrum Bay and other events like that, which tend to be forgotten about. It's probable, looking at the way that the bricks and debris has been gathered together into bundles or into stacks. On 8th April, the Belfast Telegraph's coverage of the air raid included an article under the headline "Destruction of a Church." I'm not sure whether you can see the full part of that article from the Belfast Telegraph, but the headline is "Destruction of a Church." Although the church and the area are not specifically mentioned, it's obvious from the reference to the Organ War Memorial and the other damage that's recorded in the article that it is a reference to St. Patrick's Church of Ireland in Ballymacarrat. And this is an extract from the article. A densely populated district in a Northern Ireland town felt the full force of the air raid for showers of incendiaries, some of which were fitted with whistling tail fins, came hurtling down. In all cases, the people promptly tackled the outbreaks and showed a great community spirit. Most damage in the area was caused at an imposing church, portions of which were gutted. When Telegraph representatives visited the church, a black cat was standing in the porch, which was littered with debris. Gaping holes in the roof over the east window and left transept demonstrated the fierceness of the blaze. The aisle was flooded, while one gallery was greatly charred. There was a mass of debris around the lectern on which a sodden Bible was open, while the organ erected as a memorial to those men of the parish who had made the supreme sacrifice in the 1914-1918 conflict against the same enemy was extensively damaged. As has been the case with many churches across the water, the east window, which shows Christ and the apostles, was unscathed, whilst the altar suffered little damage. Other windows in the building had been cracked by the intense heat or damaged when a portion of the roof caved in. A hymn board bore the numbers of the songs of praise used at Sunday's evening service, and one of them, number 665, contains a verse which now has a new appropriateness. It runs, "The oak strikes deeper as it bows, by furious blasts are driven, so life's vicissitudes the more have fixed my heart in heaven." Those words of comfort, determination, and hope epitomize the feeling of the people of the district, who showed Christian fortitude and also Christian charity in obeying the injunction to do their duty towards their neighbours. The church hall which adjoins is utilised as an ARP warden's post, and when they raised the alarm, the fire service quickly tackled the outbreak. The rector arrived in the early hours of the morning only to see the edifice in flames. It's known that the west window in St. Patrick's was badly damaged during the Blitz, and it had to be restored after the war by the Cloakey glassware manufacturers. Also in the church today, you can still see some of the pews which were, you can see the burn marks in some of the pews, and that's what leads me to conclude that the article is referring to St. Patrick's in Ballymacarrat. Also, the map which shows the cluster of bombs which fell in Ballymacarrat are in and around St. Patrick's Church. Alexander McElrath Higgins was born on 8th August 1901 at Mount Pottinger Road to John Higgins and Mary Rogers. So he would have been living in the area of St. Patrick's. And what I've tried to do in this talk is I'll pick out a bombing incident and then try to pick up somebody from that area who died during the air raids. Alexander married Mary Beattie on the 20th of February 1931 at St. Anne's Cathedral, and they lived at 41 Harlan Street in Victoria Ward. Harlan Street is was a matter of a couple of hundred yards away from St. Patrick's. Alexandra was a labourer at the Harlan and Wolff shipyard and was a member of the Victory Total Abstinence LOL 44 and the Earl of Erne Memorial True Blues LOL 1080. Although he was an ARP warden at ARP Post 430, he's not commemorated on the Belfast Civil Defence Services Memorial. He was 39 years old when he died at Queen's Road, leaving a widow, 2 sons and a daughter. He was buried in Dundonald Cemetery on the 11th of April 1941, and there's no memorial at his grave. So you can see here, that's the grave reference, C2, section C2, grave 643, is the reference for Alexander Hagen. And I've also then got some of the adjoining graves so that I can know. So from looking up the online records, looking at William Ramsey and the other people that are commemorated on this headstone, I've been able to work out that the Hagen's plot was here. As you can see, there's no memorial, and that will be a feature of this talk, and indeed the other 2 talks that I have planned about the Belfast Blitz, in that a lot of the fatalities are buried in unmarked graves, which again to me is something of a tragedy. Alexander was one of the guys he was an ARP warden, but he's not commemorated on the memorial. And because he died whilst attending his place of work or close to his place of work, that leads me to consider the possibility that the authorities distinguish between ARP wardens who died on duty and ARP and other people who died whilst on going through their ordinary daily life. If you think back to the bombs location maps that I showed you, there was a yellow, you can see up here, there's a yellow circle, which marks the landing of a 250 kilogram bomb in the Duncairn ward. This is the aftermath of the damage caused in one of the later air raids on the Limestone Road. That 250 kilogram bomb exploded at Clanchatten Street off Limestone Road. And I've used this image because it's the closest one that I could match up to the area. This shows damage caused by the raids at Halliday's Row, and that was in the same area. 2 fatalities from the first air raid lived on or near the Limestone Road. James Cameron Patience was born on 6th October 1880 at Collier Street to John Patience and Jane Cameron. He was a labourer when he married Jeannie Elizabeth Ferguson on the 14th of July 1919 at St Matthew's Church of Ireland on the Woodvale Road. John and Jeannie were living at 128 Limestone Road in Duncairn Ward in 1939. John worked at Harrington Wolff when he died at Queen's Road at the age of 60, and he was buried in Belfast City Cemetery on the 11th of April 1941. As you can see from the image, there's no memorial or marker at his grave, but again, because of the availability of the record, the online records, I was able to identify Frizzell's were at grave 166. I would then have moved in the opposite direction to find out which direction the plot referencing was running. And I was able to then determine that this is the grave for Patience, this is grave 167 rather than this, so this would be 165. The other fatality from that area was William Martin Pollock, who was born on 5th September 1908 at Collier Street to Thomas Pollock and Martha Martin. His father had served with the Royal Garrison Artillery from 1907 to May 1916, so he would have been a Great War veteran. William married Mary Ellen McMichael on 15th July 1935 at St Anne's Cathedral, and they were living at Collier Street in the Tigers Bay area of Duncairn Ward. William Pollock was an ARP warden and was on fire watching duties at ARP post 622 in the docks area when he died. He was 32 years old and left a widow and 2 young sons, and the sons were called Willie and Dennis. He was interred in Belfast City Cemetery on the 11th of April 1941, but again there's no memorial at his grave. He's also not commemorated on the Belfast Civil Defence Services Memorial. Martha Pollock was living at Richmond Avenue. His mother, Martha Pollock, was living at Richmond Avenue in New York when her son died, and she was a widow. So I've mentioned fire watchers. In September 1940, the Northern Whig newspaper reported that the Minister of Home Affairs, Home Security, had issued a defence regulations order that a fire watcher must be present at all times in premises where more than 30 people worked. Now, it's not clear whether that means 30 employees or 30 employees on the premises at any one time. It could be either. The order also applied to any premises which were used as a warehouse with a capacity exceeding 50,000 cubic feet, and at any sawmill or timber yard containing more than 50,000 cubic feet of timber. The RAOB, the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, advertised for 2 men to act as fire watchers at its headquarters in Church Street, Belfast, so just opposite St Anne's Cathedral. A wage of £3 per week was offered, and preference would be given to any suitable members of the order. £3 a week in 1941 would equate to approximately £169 per week in current terms. As one would expect, retailers responded to this new opportunity. Gilpin's of North Street advertised that it had fire watchers overalls of superior drills in various styles. Now, before the war, these would just have been advertised as labourers' overalls. but now they were given a new cachet by implying that they were specifically designed for fire watchers. Campbell Drennan and Company of Donegal Street advertised the availability of fire watchers rest equipment. And as you can see, that included divans, mattresses, pillows, ferry down blankets, and ferry down sleeping bags, all available from Campbell and Drennan and Company Limited, 36 Donegal Street, Belfast. 3 fire watchers would lose their lives on 8th of April. Thomas George Bell was born on 10th January 1902 at Lawyer Street to Charles Bell and Martha Jane Wilson, and the family lived at Biette Street in St. Anne's Ward. Thomas Bell was a fire watcher at the Short and Harland Company aircraft factory when he was killed. He was 39 years old and was interred in Belfast City Cemetery on 10th April. There is a small modern memorial tablet naming the 5 people interred in the grave, but the date of death inscribed for Thomas is 5th of April 1944. So either the stonemason made a mistake, or whenever the family, descendants of the family were arranging for this memorial to be installed, they picked up some misleading information. As you can see, all the names, it's very difficult to see on the screen, I'm sure, but all the names are in exactly the same style and font and so forth, or inscription typeface. So it's obvious that these have all been applied at the one time, which indicates to me that somebody doing family research has identified their family's grave and has arranged for a stone to be placed there with the names of the people interred. Daniel Gordon Fee was born on 3rd December 1915 at 49 Collier Street to William Fee and Mary Gordon. Mary Fee was still living at the same address at the start of the Second World War. Daniel married Mary Jordan Fraser on 28th April 1938 at Crumlin Road Presbyterian Church, and they lived at Farringdon Gardens in Clifton Ward. Crumlin Road Presbyterian Church would be destroyed basically during the 16th April air raid, and a replacement church was constructed in the 1950s. Daniel Gordon Fee was a fire watcher for the Belfast Harbour Commissioners, and he died at Pollock Dock. He was 25 years old, and he left a widow and a young daughter called Joan. Daniel was buried in Belfast City Cemetery on 10th April 1941. Minnie Jordan Fee died at Ainsworth Avenue on 27th December 1992, aged 78. This plot, if you go at a certain time of year in the spring, the whole plot is just full of daffodils, to such an extent that they obliterate part of the inscription. In the grave immediately beside it, there is a family of Blitz fatalities, and there is no marker, there's no indication that it is the grave of Blitz fatalities. Samuel Hoy Gowan was born in 1906 at West Derby in Lancashire to Samuel Gowan, who is a master mariner, and Mary Elizabeth McFadden, and the family was living at Worcester Road in Bootle in 1911. In April 1924, Samuel Hoy Gowan had been at sea for 2 years and was listed as an apprentice on SS St. Bede when he was hospitalised at Vancouver Island. He married Mary Margaret Quinn on 25th March 1931 at Belfast Registrar's Office, and they lived at Castleview Road, opposite the main gates to the Stormont Estate. So as you can see, it's a red brick semi-detached house in a relatively affluent, relatively middle-class area. And yet Samuel Gowan was a fire watcher at the Short and Harland Company aircraft factory when he died. I think he was doing this job not for the money, but as part of his patriotic duty. He was doing his bit in a way that he felt was appropriate. Certainly, based on where he was living, I don't think he was doing it for £3 a week. He was 35 years old when he died, and he was buried in Dundonald Cemetery on 10th April 1941. Probate was granted to Margaret Gowan, and his effects were valued at just under £1,189. In current terms, that equates to £67,000. So as you can see, I don't think he needed to go out to get £3 a week working as a fire watcher. I believe that he was working as a fire watcher in the evenings overnight as part of what he felt was his war duty. Based on the information on the Blitz Maps website, 8 bombs exploded in a relatively tight cluster on Queen's Island at or near the Harland and Wolff shipyard and the Short and Harland aircraft factory. This shows the approximate locations of the bomb on an historic map of the area. The 3 yellow circles, as I said before, indicate where 250-kilogram bombs landed, where Titanic Belfast and the Titanic Hotel are located now. The red circles mark where 5 50-kilogram bombs landed, 3 at or near Slipway 1, which of course is where RMS Titanic was constructed, 1 at Hamilton's Road, which is obviously this one here, and 1 at the aircraft's parts shed, which would have been part, as you can see, it's marked here as engineering works. So that would have been part of the aircraft manufacturing for the war effort. 8 men are recorded as dying in this area. They would all have been either employees of Harland and Wolff or Short and Harland, or men who were on fire watching duties in that area. I've already referred to some of them under other headlines, if you like. So I'm just going to finish off with the remainder of them. John Esdale was born on 6th July 1870 at Kerr, near Desert Martin in County Londonderry. His parents were James Esdale and Eliza Henry. He married Sarah Meek on the 4th of December 1896 at Desert Martin Church of Ireland, and they and their son James were living at 41 Bristol Street in Court Ward in 1911. At this time, John was recorded as being a shipyard fireman. That means that he would have been involved in stoking boilers rather than fighting fires. John Esdale was still living at 41 Bristol Street in 1939 and was recorded as being a labourer. He was 72 years old when he died at Queen's Island, and he's buried in the graveyard at Lecumber Presbyterian Church in County Londonderry. I asked Sam Hudson, who lives in the area and has done a lot of research in regards to war fatalities from the area, and he checked and there's no memorial at the grave. Thomas Gardner Ferguson was born on 23rd October 1886 at Garfield Place in Ballymena to William James Ferguson and Sarah Kellen Mann. Sarah Ferguson died of enteric fever at 16 Glentilt Street in Belfast on 3rd August 1891 at the age of 27. And William James subsequently married Elizabeth Jackson on the 26th of August 1896 in Agnes Street Presbyterian Church. In 1901, the Ferguson family was living at White House, but was living at Percy Street in 1911. William Ferguson was recorded as being a shipyard joiner, and Thomas was a wood machinist. Thomas Ferguson and his wife Margaret were living at Primrose Avenue in Bangor. When Thomas died, he was 54 years old and was buried in Belfast City Cemetery on the 15th of April 1941. And again, you can see that there's no memorial at his grave. And again, I've got a cross-reference to the Rogers family grave, from which I was able to determine where the Ferguson grave was. Another Harland and Wolff man was James Stanley Kyle, who was born on 19th March 1918 at the Mount in Belfast. His parents were James Kyle, who was a chauffeur, and Jane Guff. His family was living at Hillview Avenue in Pottinger Ward when James died at Queen's Island at the age of 23. He was buried in Dundonald Cemetery on the 10th of April 1941, and as is so common, as I've said time and time again this evening, there's no memorial at his grave. And the final, I've picked as the final one in this evening's talk, the final biography is of a Great War veteran. Joseph Betty Lambert was born on 1st March 1883 at Rathdrum in County Wicklow to James Lambert, who was a surveyor, and Elizabeth Sophia Armstrong. Obviously, as a land surveyor, map surveyor, his father would have moved around a bit, so the different members of his family were born in different counties of Ireland. In 1901, he was living with his widowed mother and 4 siblings at Agra Street in Ormo Ward, and he was employed in the linen business. His brother and 2 sisters were involved in the tea business. He was a linen lapper when he married Eliza Jane Wilson on 20th November 1905 at the Central Methodist Mission's Grosvenor Hall. Of course, that's no longer there. In 1911, Joseph and Eliza and their 2 daughters were living at Silvergrove Street in Cromack Ward. Joseph Lambert served with the 10th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles during the Great War, being transferred to the Class Z Army Reserve on 16th February 1919. Joseph and Eliza were living at Silvergrove Street when Eliza died on 17th August 1937 at the age of 50. And Joseph was living with his married daughter and his son-in-law at Rowland Street off Sandy Row when he was injured at Belfast Harbour on 7th April. He was taken to the Mater Hospital, where he died the following day, aged 53. And he's buried in Hillsborough churchyard, and he was buried there on the 11th of April 1941. I walked through Hillsborough churchyard looking for his grave, and I wasn't able to find a headstone. But in the light of more information, it's quite probable that he's buried in a grave belonging to his in-laws. So I would really need to go back and look for a Wilson headstone with the right family details. He may or may not be mentioned on it, but at least that would give me an indication as to where he is buried. Death notices were placed in the newspapers by the 10th Royal Irish Rifles Memorial Association and the Belfast branch of the Apprentice Boys of Derry Baker Club. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings a conclusion to this talk about 13 men who died on one night in 1941, 80 years ago today. Thank you.